You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers about hikers for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, thanks for coming back and joining me on the podcast with episode 400 in the rearview mirror and heading towards number 500. You're listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. And I'm Mighty Blue, or Steve Adams. Today on the show, we have another of those wondrous young women who never cease to amaze me. Emily Johnson, with the enchanting name of Cobweb Rose, completed her thru-hike this year, and she shares her rather intimate story of why she was out there. In part, it was to do with her experiences during COVID as a nurse, though it had been a dream for quite some time. She also plays a very warm tribute to a guy who she refers to as her hiking mentor, and he clearly helped her get ready for the trail. Emily will be on shortly. With the rest of our Mighty Blue class of 23 back at home, having either curtailed or completed their hike for this year, we catch up with Jessica Lang Wright as she's hit her home state, heading for Harper's Ferry. Then we're in the final chapters of Then the Hurricane, with George Stefanos experiencing kindness and a lot of class at Shaw's Hostel in Monson before entering the 100-mile wilderness. I've also got a bit of Black Friday news, so stay tuned for that. I think you're going to want to hear it. So let's meet Emily Johnson, or Cobweb Rose. Our guest today is Emily Johnson with the awesome trail name of Cobweb Rose. Hey, Emily, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hey, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Well, of course, we'll have to start with that. How on earth did you get that? Who named you? And how appropriate is it?
So I actually got my name before I ever got on the AT. As far as the thru-hike goes. So I was gifted the name by section hiking friends that I did a lot of miles on the AT with. And the cobweb part came from being the first out to hike every morning and getting a lot of cobwebs in the face, which was a regular occurrence for me on the AT.
Silk blazing.
Yeah, silk blazing.
Yes.
I was very good at that. And the rose part came because somehow I always end up in a tramily full of guys, no matter who I am hiking with or where or when. And so the rose part came from being dubbed the rose amongst the thorns.
That's nice. So who actually named you? It was another section hiker, was it?
Yeah, so my mentor, Christus Cowboy, was the one that named me.
What an awesome name. That's almost a better name, actually. That's very cool. Very cool. Now, you completed the AT this year in almost exactly 6 months, I seem to think it was.
It was
exactly
1 day
6
shy.
months. Right, okay,
1 day
fine.
shy, yeah.
Had this been an ambition for quite some time, and how did you actually get into backpacking in the first place?
So my mentor, the one that gave me the trail name, Christus Cowboy, was actually the one that taught me how to backpack. I've always loved hiking. I've been hiking since I was a kid, and I learned to love the trails when I was hiking around the trails in Acadia National Park, because my family used to go to Bar Harbor in Acadia every summer when I was growing up. So my mentor got me into backpacking sometime around near the end of my college career, and I fell in love with it. Like, I absolutely loved it. And he would take me out on trips on the AT. So we would do sections on the AT. And so that's how I got introduced to the community there and the lore and the idea of a thru hike. And every time we go out for a section hike, I would think, I'm never going to be satisfied until I have thru hiked this trail.
Quite right too. Yeah.
And I was correct. I would never have been satisfied without thru hiking the trail. So that's how I ended up wanting to do it, and then ended up finally doing it.
So, Christus, if you don't mind me asking, how old are you? Because you look like you could be just about to go to college. So you're obviously not just about to go to college.
No, I'm 26.
Okay, well, you look a whole lot younger than that.
Thank you.
So tell us how, because you mentioned when we spoke before about your mentor. I don't remember the name Christus Cowboy, but then why would I? It's an unusual name. Tell us about him. How did he become your mentor? That's interesting that you named him as that.
Yeah. So I actually, it's going to sound like a really weird story. I promise it's not as weird as it sounds.
When someone says that, They are about to indeed to tell me a weird story. So you carry on.
It is a little bit, it sounds weird, and it's not weird, I promise. So he was actually, there were two LUPD officers. I went to Liberty University for college. So there are two LUPD officers who used to come over and act as crossing guards for the high school that was attached to the college, so where I went to high school. Right. And so every day I would walk across this crosswalk on the way to my car, going to go home, and I would say thank you for being at the crosswalk for us and making sure we don't get run over. And so I did this to both of them. For a couple of years. And so just through starting to say thank you, we ended up having more and more conversations and getting to know each other and becoming friends. And so when I went to college, the two officers were like, come and visit us. Like, come visit us at our offices. Here's where they are. Like, you're a good friend to us. We would love to see you in college.
It's just a weird bit.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's just like that's just how I got to know my mentor, who was one of the officers, and then another friend that I have in that same office, because I would just go and say hi in college. And so I ended up spending just a lot of time talking to actually both of them, not even just Chris's Cowboy there, and sharing life with them. And so he was kind of like a dad to me when my dad couldn't fully be there for me. So that's kind of how he became like my honestly just my mentor for life. And then he offered to teach me how to backpack because he knew I was really into backpacking, or like wanted to get into backpacking because I was really into hiking. And so that's how he became my backpacking mentor as well.
What a nice fella to be able to do that, because let's face it, with most guys, there's normally a side to everything, but I'm glad there wasn't in this case,
Yeah.
And the fact that he's a decent guy who thinks that this young woman, you're reflecting your backpacking love of him, and that's a really great thing for him to be able to provide that for. So I appreciate that he did that to you as well. And by teaching you how to backpack, what skills do you think he gave you that you can really say, this guy taught me this stuff?
Honestly, almost everything. He taught me how to pack a backpack correctly, the things that I would need to bring. He taught me how to purify water, which initially was with iodine drops, and I hated the taste of iodine, so I switched to a different filter very quickly. But he also taught me how to plan trips and how to be flexible. Although that was the thing I ended up teaching him a lot more, because I would be like, so I know we've got this mileage planned for this day, but if we go to this shelter, then like we can get off trail a day sooner and go get like French fries for dinner. Like that would be great.
Good planning.
Yeah. He taught me a lot of independence as far as like going out backpacking goes.
So before you went on the trail, did you do overnights by yourself, or did you do it with other people as well?
Yes. So I started I did a lot of sections on the AT, like I said, with my mentor. And we would do like 4 and 5 day stretches and do like between 65 and 75 miles usually. Wow. And then I did one trip. I was going to hike a portion of Section 9 of the Long Trail in Vermont, which, as you know, is part of the AT. The section I was going to hike was right before Mount Mansfield. I was going to end on Mount Mansfield, and it ended up being absolutely horrible weather. It was my first solo backpacking trip. And by the time you get up to that section of the Long Trail, it's very remote. And I didn't have an inReach. I didn't have signal. And then it was pouring rain. It was freezing cold. So I ended up cutting my trip short. But that was the only overnight trip I'd done by myself.
Oh, right. Really?
Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay. So you like the idea of hiking, then you like the idea of backpacking, which they are two separate things, I know. And I didn't realize actually until I was hiking the trail that backpacking wasn't the same as hiking. It just feels an entirely different thing, doesn't it? What were you getting out of it? What was it doing for you as a person? Because it doesn't appeal to everybody, does it? You know, the whole thing of sleeping in a tent in the woods, the whole thing of sleeping in a tent in the first place, you know, all those things. What were you getting out of it yourself? Did you find something within you that it brought some of your strengths out?
Backpacking, I found, gave me a lot of peace. I went into nursing. I've been an EMT since I was 16 years old.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So, I witnessed my first, the deceased patient at 17 years old. And then, I've been active for 7 years, and then I've had my certification it'll be 10 years next month.
Congratulations.
So I started carrying a lot of that stuff home with me very early on in my life. And when I got into nursing, obviously I worked in the ICU. So we had a lot of very critical patients, a lot of high tension family situations, and then a lot of deaths there as well. And then, of course, within the first year that I was a nurse, when I was a baby nurse and had no confidence and didn't know what I was doing, the pandemic started. So our unit by default became the COVID-19 unit. And so those were the patients that I worked with. And it was extremely high stress in that. So what I found was
you weren't one of those amazing nurses who held the phone to people while they were dying. They could speak to their relations. Oh, geez.
Yes, I was.
Yeah, that's traumatic.
And before we got, our unit used iPads, so we could actually show the families video, so they could see each other. But before we got iPads and before visitors were allowed to stand outside the rooms, which was over a year into the pandemic, we were their only human connection when they were passing from this life into the next.
That's a privilege, though, isn't it? I'm sure I'm sure it's traumatic, but I'm sure you saw it as a privilege as well. And you've had an impact on someone's life at a very young age, and that's clearly impacted you. So being out in the woods, did that give you that peace that you needed at the time?
It did, because what I found was, especially in that first year of nursing, I worked night shift. So when I would go home in the morning to sleep, the alarms from work would follow me home. So I would hear the continuous dialysis machine alarms. I would hear the vital signs alarms. I would hear the call bells. I would just hear all kinds of alarms in my head, and I couldn't turn it off.
Wow.
And what I found was when I went to the woods, they were gone.
Wow. Immediately?
Not immediately. It usually took a couple of days, but I would come back having not heard those alarms in my head and not really had to think about how stressed I was at work for those few days that I was on trail.
Right. And so your hike you've just done, you obviously didn't hear anything for those 6 months.
I didn't.
We're jumping ahead here, which I didn't intend to do, but I'm going to just for a second while you're talking about being a nurse. I know you haven't gone back to it. Is it because you're frightened of going back to the alarms, or you just want a bit of a break anyway?
I think I just need a bit more of a break from it. It's not because I'm frightened of going back to the alarms. I haven't heard alarms for a couple years now. I think that was more, especially when I was a baby nurse.
I love that expression.
I know. It's true. But no, I love being able to provide patient care. I love being able to make a difference in someone's life. I love being able to hold their hand when they're passing from this life to the next. I love to be able to be that person that can give them a little bit of compassion during the worst time in their lives, because I work in the ICU, so it is the worst time in their life. They're very, very sick to get there. And if they're not just very, very sick, they're dying. So to me, it's a huge privilege to be able to provide care for them and also for their families, because a lot of people forget that, when a patient passes away, their family needs that care now too, that care and compassion, because they just lost someone that they love very, very much, and they won't be able to see them again.
And you were the one were you one that broke the news to the family sometime? It
depended on the situation. Usually the physician would be the one to officially pronounce the patient, but most of the time, especially if families were able to be there for a patient passing, then, we would do the initial confirmation. And some states allow the nurses to do the pronunciation with two nurses. And we would, tell the family if they were in the room with the patient, just so that they knew, because it's an important moment for a lot of families.
Of course. It's a massive moment for families.
It's a huge moment, moment. But I would, I love that aspect of nursing. The problem with a lot of what's happening in the nursing field right now is, since the pandemic, when hospitals learned that we could wear a lot of different hats, and we were taking care of more patients than was safe because of the emergency conditions, unfortunately, even though the emergency conditions have technically passed, the hospitals are still not providing safe staffing ratios. So if you actually look up nursing protests or nursing strikes right now, pretty much all of them are for safe staffing ratios, because in the ICU, I should only be taking care of 1 to 2 patients. When I started travel nursing, I was taking care of typically 2 to 3 patients. And unfortunately, when they're that sick, you can't give the care that you need to every single one of those patients if you're having to care for more than what's safe. So that was a lot of actually what kind of drove me into the hike, that and a lot of the emotional baggage that comes with being in healthcare for that many years.
Some great background, because I was wondering how you got away for 6 months, but you actually must have quit then, didn't you?
So I was a travel nurse before I started the trail.
Oh, right. So does that make you an individual contractor? You could come and go where... Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yep. So I finished out my contract and then just decided not to take another one.
Right. So you decided to go on this hike, and thank you for telling me that, by the way, just now. That must have been quite tough to tell, actually, in many ways as well. And you're married.
Yes.
Did your husband have any desire to do this hike with you at all?
No. Hiking is not his thing. I
can see from the look on your face that, yeah, we've called that a no then, should we?
Yeah, hiking is not his passion. It's just not his thing. Like, he doesn't mind being outdoors. He doesn't mind, going for short walks. But the idea of a long-term backpacking trip, he's one of those people that's like, I would never do that. I don't want to sleep on the ground. I don't want to be dirty for days in a row, like getting hot and sweaty and gross every day and carrying everything that you need for the day for the week on your back.
Which sounds attractive to us, doesn't it?
I know. Yeah. I don't know why someone else would want to do something like that.
So, and I know I ask this of women, not of men. So I apologize, as I always do. How did he feel about you being out there? Was he worried about you? I mean, what was his attitude towards you being out there? Because he knew you were a backpacker or a hiker when you first met, wasn't he? Didn't he?
Yeah. He was definitely worried about me. Mm-hmm. Like, he, before I went on the hike, that was one of those things that he was like, well, I mean, have you seen these statistics about injuries and fatal accidents and murders on the trail? And I'm like, yes, honey, I've seen all those things. Like, it's going to be fine. It's like, well, what if you get lost and you don't come back? And I'm like, it's okay, honey. There's so many people that travel this trail. It shouldn't be an issue. But yeah, he was definitely concerned about me being out there. Not necessarily being out there with like the tramily that I ended up with, but more so of like me being out there by myself, because I think he was concerned I wouldn't find a tramily.
Well, that is the worrying part. That is a worrying part frankly for any spouse, But it's probably. I know it sounds sexist, but I think I would worry about more my wife going than she would worry about me going in terms of physical safety. I suspect that's the case anyway. But, maybe I'm wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right, actually. But I believe also you started the trail with your mentor, didn't you? Did he come and do the first part of the hike with you? Was that to kind of ease you into the trail, or did you feel you needed to be with somebody to start with?
I think it was a lot to ease me into the trail. So I actually did invite him to come with me for that first part, because he actually hasn't hiked in Georgia before. He's done a lot of his section hiking in Virginia. So I was like, this is Cowboy. Like, I'm going on this adventure. I want you to come. Like, it'll be fun. Like, you got me into this and I want you to be here for the start of this big adventure. So he took time off from work and came down and started the trail with me and ended up hiking with us through Unicoi Gap, I think it was.
Oh, that's a couple of days, several, more than a couple of days, about 5 days, isn't it? Something like that, Unicoi?
5 or 6, something like that.
5 or 6 days, yeah.
We ended up going into Helen because that day it poured down rain and it was freezing cold and the whole trail was a mudslide and we were miserable.
He was done then, wasn't he? Yeah.
I think, I don't know if he was mentally all the way done, but I think we were all pretty done that day.
And when we spoke about that, and I knew he'd started with you, at one point you knew he was going to go home. So I suppose he went home after you got off the trail at Helen, did he?
He left in Helen, yeah. And
were you ready for him to go? Did you feel ready for the adventure by yourself? Because I know you met one of your tramley on the first night or first couple of days, didn't you? So were you hiking with somebody already as well?
Yeah, so I actually met Mountain Crusher on the first night on trail, and I hiked with him from there to Katahdin, and then I met Snapshot at Neil Gap, which was 4 days in. So both of them were actually already hiking with us by the time Christus Cowboy got off trail. And that was actually where we picked up our original fourth member of the tramley. His name was Lucky. He only stayed with us for 500 miles. Another guy. But he only stayed with us for 500 miles. But, we had a tramley by then. So I think he felt good leaving me with the guys because obviously he'd spent time with them as well. And he thought they were, going to be very respectful of me and take good care of me. And so when he got off trail, he actually called my husband first thing and was like, listen, she's in with a good group of guys. You don't have to worry.
That's, that must have been great for your husband here and I'm sure for Chris's cowboy as well. And I know it was pretty chilly in those first few weeks, wasn't it?
Yes.
Were you properly prepared? This guy taught you a lot of stuff, so I presume he taught you the right sort of gear. Were you quite comfortable with your gear in those early weeks?
Yes, I actually was pretty comfortable. I did send some things home, and honestly, I cannot for the life of me remember what the first set of things I sent home was because I did a lot of swap outs and drop outs throughout the trail. But I'm a very, very cold sleeper. So Chris's cowboy used to take me on a lot of shoulder season hikes. So I learned really fast what I needed in a good sleep system. So I did sleep warm for the winter time on trail. And
your gear generally held up, did it?
It did. I had some issues with my tent and I had to get a warranty replacement backpack. Unfortunately, 1,900 miles in, I was like, you can't make it another 298.
Oh, dear.
Oh, yeah.
So, as I say, we mentioned the cold in those early miles, but you told me you actually sent home your winter gear by Irwin. That's way too early, isn't it?
Yeah, it was definitely too early. So we were like, oh, no, it's going to be fine. Like, we had some 70-degree days during the daytime and it hadn't been that cold at night. And so we were like, man, we haven't worn our gloves or our mid layers for a couple of weeks. So we'll just send those home. Like, it's fine. Like, it looks like it's going to be warmer from here on out. And then the Grayson Highlands said, hold my beer.
Yeah, you said you had high winds and hail there. So
yeah,
I remember going over it both times, and I went at different times. I think I started first time in February, second time in March, the other way around actually. And the Grayson Highlands was a lovely, idyllic sort of spot. But for you, it was high winds and hail.
It was, it was beautiful. Like, we got nice views. We got to see the ponies. But oh my goodness, it was so cold. It was so cold up there and super high winds. We did get hailed on the one day. Of course, that was my third time going through the Grayson Highlands because I had done 2 section hikes through the Grayson Highlands before that. One of the section hikes, it snowed. So I was like, oh, Grayson Highlands, it's fine. Hail, okay, that's cool. This is just normal.
Oh dear. And I know this year has been really tough and so varied with the weather as well. You had obviously a lot of heat, I guess, through the summer in Virginia. And you mentioned drought in Pennsylvania, and water's often difficult up there. What was your longest carry you had to do in terms of water?
In Pennsylvania, it was 20 miles because we were hiking out of Palmerton. And that was, of course, you have that I don't remember how long the section is where there's no water marked on far out at all because all the water is so heavily contaminated in that area with the heavy metals.
Sure, that's right. Yeah.
But then I think the 2 water sources after that were also listed as dry in the comments. But we were fortunate enough that we had stayed with a trail angel named Mary Poppins the night before that. And so she was actually slack packing us out of Lehigh Gap. So basically my backpack just had a giant water bladder in it.
Oh, good. Yeah, because it's something we take water for granted when we're at home. We go home and turn the tap on, don't we? When you're out there and you've got no water for, say, 4 or 5 miles, it's almost sets off a panic alarm. It did with me anyway, and I'm starting to feel it now, actually, the thought of it. You're hiking, you're exerting yourself, and you've got no water. It's a worry. So Pennsylvania, from what I've heard over the years, it seems to have got worse over time. So there's some problems there that need to be resolved somehow. I don't know how, to be honest with you. Then, of course, you had the floods in New York. But
yes.
Did they close part of the trail there? And didn't you just miss the closure?
So it we had the floods hit as the day that we walked into New York. So we were actually on those exposed rock ridges.
Easy for you to say. Yeah.
Say that 5 times fast.
Yeah.
When we first walked into New York. And so we made it to the road where you turn off to go to Belleville Farms Creamery. And we were we were going to go to the creamery anyway, but then it just kept raining. And we're like, well, we're going to a motel. Then we're not doing the rest of our miles today because we don't want to be up on the ridgeline when the storm is this bad.
Sure.
So we did that. We ended up the next day, we hiked into whatever that state park is where the lemon squeezer is. That was closed, but they were allowing people to go through.
Is that Harriman State Park?
Harriman, that's
Park?
it. Yep.
Yeah.
Because a ridge runner had just come out to talk to the police officer that was sitting at the road to make sure people didn't go in. And she was like, oh, no, it's fine. You guys can go. So we hiked through that. And then I think it was the next day that we hit Bear Mountain, which had been closed, and they wanted you to do a road walk around. I
definitely would have taken the road walk around.
we definitely did not. We went over Bear Mountain, even though it was closed. I think we kind of knew by that point, like anytime the trail closes, it's not really for the thru-hikers because we have worked so hard to get where we are. We're not going to do something stupid on the trail. I think it's more for the day hikers that don't understand that, like, hey, if you get to a point where it's not safe to keep going on the trail, you need to turn back and find a different route.
You know what? That makes sense. That makes sense, actually. Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't trying to get injured in New York. Like we were close then,
You had a lot of rain throughout, didn't you? Looking at your months, you went from middle of March to the middle of September. You must have been pretty damp in New Hampshire and Maine as well, weren't you?
Yeah, we were damp through Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. We had a lot of rain.
Now, we've talked on this show about the pros and cons of hiking in a group. And whilst I've hiked with people, both of my thru hikes, there are times when you kind of don't want to be with them all the time. So were you such a tight group, or did people come in and out your tramley? Or were there times you actually spent some time away from your tramley, like even spending time camping away from them? So
our tramley, like, Snapshot, Mountain Crusher, and I were really like the core tramley because, like I said, Lucky left after 500 miles, and then we didn't meet up with Struggle Bus and Bubba Yeager until the Whites in New Hampshire. So for the majority of the trail, it was just the three of us. And we had kind of like extended tramley members, like the Silverbacks, Cruise Control, Fuel Rod, and CB Mike were part of our original extended tramley.
All guys. Shocker.
I know, right? All guys there. And we had a couple other like extended tramleys that we ended up kind of leapfrogging with as we went. But Mountain Crusher was definitely the fastest when it came to uphills. So for a lot of the early part of the trail, he would hike ahead, and then Snapshot and I, who were pretty much evenly paced, would just hike together the rest of the day. And then like towards the end of the trail, MC wanted to hike with us more. So we ended up just all hiking together. But there were some days where we needed a little space. So if somebody said, hey, I'll meet you guys at whatever location, then everybody kind of knew, like, okay, they just need a little space. We'll see them at the end of the day. Yeah.
And having spent so much time with them and spending probably, it feels like 24/7, whether it isn't actually 24/7, do you think you learned something from each other along the way? In terms of not only hiking, but people and relationships and stuff like that. How was that? How was that interaction with them? Was it powerful and positive?
I think so. I mean, they're really amazing guys, both of them in their own right. And I think Snapshot was definitely the most laid back in the group. So I think he kind of rubbed off some of that on me because a lot of nurses, I don't know if you know this or not, but especially ICU nurses are very type A, micromanaging. Like we have to control everything. And so it was very helpful to have a presence like Snapshot there where he was like, it's okay, Cobweb. Like, it's going to be fine. We can't control it. It's okay. It's going to be, it's so good. It's all good. We're just going to hike today.
And you sometimes need that. Don't you? Need someone to say that to you.
You do.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And then MC was very much like, he was very encouraging to me. So like when I was like, dude, I can't do this. He's like, no, Cobweb, you can do it. You're going to be fine. So I think both of them really like, they helped me realize on very difficult hiking days and sometimes very difficult hiking months that everything was going to be okay.
You know what? I'm pleased you said that, and we should always learn from our companions, especially spending so much time with them as well. And we've already talked about how much you love the idea of backpacking. Did that, I suppose, magic, I guess, survive the whole 6 months? You know, was it what you'd hoped it would be, or did it turn out different from what you'd imagined?
I think it was a little of both. So I love, like I said, I love the idea of backpacking. You know, it was always my way to find peace and to find an escape and, you know, calm down, relax, de-stress.
Sure.
And it definitely did that for me. And I mean, I'd hiked in shoulder seasons. I'd hiked in the cold. I'd hiked in the fall. I'd hiked in the snow. I'd hiked in the height of summer during a record-setting heat wave in Tennessee. I'd hiked then, you know. So I'd experienced all of those conditions before. So I think I was ready for that. But at the same time, I don't think I was ready for the months on end where it was so exhaustingly hot.
It's your job,
yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, like, my body was struggling for a lot of the second half of the hike. My body was really struggling, both with the heat and humidity and with joint issues, because I started having knee issues back in Georgia. I almost couldn't walk in Virginia, but I was like, I am not taking time off trail. I am going to finish this trail.
And by the way, was that because you're just bloody minded and determined, or was it because you were with a tramley, you wanted to stay with them? Was that part of it as well?
Yeah, it was both. I mean, I know that the guys probably would have slowed down for me, and they did. They slowed a lot of mileage down for me, actually,
Sure.
When I was struggling so hard with my knees. But also, I was like, no, I'm not getting off trail for 2 weeks. That's just not happening. It's not an option.
Good for you. Good for you. Now, I know when we spoke before, you said that you were so ready for the hike to be over, but you didn't want it to end. So tell us about your Katahdin day. It's always a bittersweet thing, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it was so exciting. We stayed at a hostel, the AT hostel in Millinocket the night before, because the hurricane had come through the day before we summited. We actually hiked the final couple of miles to Katahdin Stream Campground in the hurricane.
Jeez.
It was the fitting end. It was the only way it could have ended this year,
Epic,
you know?
Epic. Yeah.
Absolutely. And then the next day was perfect. But we were all worried. We were like, well, what if the road's closed on the way in? And like, what if the trail's got a bunch of blowdowns on it? And like, what if the water makes it impassable? Like, what is going to happen? Like, we have to make it up Katahdin. Today's a perfect day.
Yeah.
So there was all that anxiety. And then also like the excitement. You could just feel the excitement. I mean, it was a palpable excitement in that hostel for anyone who was getting ready to summit and anybody who had just summited and had come back there.
I want to tell you, because I think my listeners have already told a couple of times, on my last day in 2019, I was at the hostel. And maybe it's the same one. When there's some stairs up the back that you go down these stairs, the end, I fell down the stairs. I thought I might have broken something, because at my size, I don't fall lightly, you know. But I was okay. I just shouted out number 43, which is my 43rd fall of the trip, and I got up and carried on. But yeah, you're right. The atmosphere is so powerful. I actually found that atmosphere was powerful in Monson as well, at Shores, before you're about to go into 100 Mile Wilderness, because you know it's getting near the end. But you're able to get into the park, obviously. You set out the easy first mile. You think, well, this ain't too much.
Oh, yeah, totally chill. And then the trail goes, whoop, and you're going straight up the side of the mountain. You're like, oh, that's the straight line they drew.
That's the one. That's right, yeah.
But by the time, so it was a beautiful day. It was perfect. The trail was flooded, so we were just hiking in a stream, but that was par for the course.
Sure.
And by the time we got to right before you clear tree line, you know how all those trees are on the rocks and they've got these moss bases and really shallow roots?
Yeah.
It was so windy that the moss roots were coming up off the rock and just flapping with the whole tree attached to it. And I was like, guys, you might need to hold me down to the mountain. I might blow away when we clear tree line. So it was gusty up there. I couldn't stand up straight. Like once we hiked all the way up there, I thought I was going to blow off the rocks. Like I had to stay really low the entire time. I was like crawling on all fours. We were wearing our puffies because it was just super, super windy. And then when we got up to the tableland, I had to hike at an angle because I could not stand up straight in that wind or I would have got knocked over. But then by the time we got up to the sign, which, you know, when you're on the tableland, you start seeing that sign and you start seeing the people up there and you're like, that's it. That's the end of my hike. That's the end of my journey.
Sure.
And, you know, the last few steps where you're going past that final blaze and then there's the sign in front of you, like it's so surreal. Because
it's overwhelming, actually, isn't it? In some ways. Yeah.
It is. Because, I mean, the entire time you're hiking up Katahdin, first of all, you're having a blast because it's a really cool mountain.
Yeah.
But also, you know, you're thinking about the last 6 months of your life that you've dedicated to this hike, all of the trials, all of the weather, all of the people that you've met, the things that you've done, the things that you've found in yourself. And you get up to that sign. And for me, it was like, I don't want to touch the sign because it means that my journey is over. So I stood there and cried and stared at the sign, and we looked at each other and we were like, guys, we did it. And then MC came over and gave me a hug, and he's like, we did it, Cobweb. And then I reached out and touched the sign, and it felt so amazing.
It still brings up hairs in the back of my neck when I talk to hikers who've done it this year, because I know I've done it and I felt it myself, and it's still just a magical moment to do. But you just said you thought about the things that have changed in you, and how had you changed as a person for that hike?
That's a really good question, because I think I changed.
I had to ask one.
I think I changed in a lot of small ways that added up to a big way that I didn't really see until after I got home from the hike.
Did your husband notice differences then?
I actually never asked him about that. I really didn't. It was just something I didn't think about. I know Christus Cowboy did. He noticed. I think he felt the same way that I did, that I had found a very deep well of inner strength that I didn't know that I had. Like, I think he knew that I had it. Come on, Emily. But
of course you had it. You've done what you've done before you went on the hike. The work you do, you had an inner strength already there. So that you were drawing on wells of that inner strength. So don't ever worry about that. You knew you had that. So has it scratched the itch, or is the itch still there to go and do more things?
Well, I went through Hike the Foothills Trail 2 weeks ago.
Just after you finished the AT, yeah.
I got a month after I got off the AT, I got on the Foothills Trail.
Wow.
It's only 76.2 miles, but it was peak foliage, and I could do it in 5 days because I was in really good condition.
Cool, yeah.
So apparently I did not fully scratch the itch.
That's funny. Oh dear. So you're going to go again, are you?
I think I'm done with hiking for this year as far as through hikes go. But it's November.
You being careful what you say, just in case your husband listens.
No, just in case I change my mind.
All right, okay. Well, look, I saw your picture on Facebook, which is why I reached out to you. You look so joyous. I often tell people, make sure you got your finish prepared so you know what you're going to look like at the side, because it's the pictures you're going to live with for the rest of your life. And you'll look great. You look so fabulous. You look so healthy and fit, and you're having fun. You have that huge smile on your face. I admire all you people who've done it this year. I always particularly admire the women who take it on. They kick-ass women who come and do this every time. So I appreciate you coming and sharing the story with us. And if you do go again, let me know, and we'll perhaps follow you on your PCT if you ever happen to do that in some stage in the future.
Thanks, Steve.
All right. Take it easy, okay?
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm really glad she shared a story as a nurse. It makes perfect sense that the woods and mountains gave her some relief from the noises in her head. You sometimes need to step out of your regular life to feel peace, even if it's just a short walk around your local community. Just walking and listening to your heartbeat is surprisingly therapeutic. And how lucky was Emily to find a man who wanted to help her backpack? Mentors can be enormously important in a young person's life, so hats off to Christus Cowboy for being that person for Emily. And she's obviously got the bug, hasn't she? Even doing the Foothills Trail a couple of weeks after Katahdin. I would not be in the least bit surprised if she reaches out someday in the future to share her PCT through hike with us. Watch this space. Before we hear from Jessica, I want to thank all the donors who keep allowing us to put out this and our other podcasts. I always read out the names to let them know how grateful I truly am. And funnily enough, I think of them individually as I read them out. Several I've met over the years, yet even those I've never met or seen on Facebook, I have a mental image of what they look like. So this week, thanks go to our monthly donors, Michael Gosh, Betty McInerney, Sharon James, Anne Pickin, Sean Deadwiley, Kevin Weidman, Emmanuel Bravo Ramos, and Brian Alsop, as well as a generous donation from Donna Kirkwood. Thanks to all of you. You always make my week. now, and this time not when she's she's half asleep early in the morning. Let's hear from Jessica. Here she is.
Hello.
Hey, Jessica, good morning.
Good morning.
Not in your sleeping bag.
Not in my sleeping bag, and a little later in the day.
And there is a reason for that.
Yes,
so
there is.
What's happened?
Unfortunately, I am waiting at urgent care with Mike. He got sick a few days ago, and we're waiting to find out what's going on.
What type of sick? Is it stomach related or?
Really, really sore throat.
Oh, right, blimey. That's good. Has he had a COVID test? I mean, it's still around, isn't it?
Not yet.
Okay, well, you could well be having one of those in. So what's the plan then? You're going to hang out for him, or you've been because I think in one of your notes to me you said you've been actually hiking alone for the last 2 days. So where's Mike been then? If he's not in urgent care, if he wasn't in urgent care then?
He's been staying at my parents' house.
That's nice. That's nice of them.
Yeah, the plan was to slack pack from my parents' house as much as possible, and it's one of those things where I think this trail keeps trying to teach me that you're exactly where you need to be, whether you like it or not sometimes, right? So
interesting. So you've got the hook from home and you didn't even know.
Yeah, well, if this had happened when we were trying to deal with hotels and shuttles and do we go, do we not,
Sure.
staying out at night type of thing, it would have been far more of a nightmare than it is. So it's lucky we were where we were.
So has that necessitated you hiking alone, or have you been hanging out at your parents' house as well?
Well, I'm on much more of a tight deadline than he is. He has a little more flexibility. He can kind of come back and make up the miles. I got a job to get to.
Right.
He wasn't feeling up to hiking, so my dad took me out, and I have been continuing on.
Your dad is a trooper.
My dad is a trooper. My dad was literally a trooper at one point in his life.
Oh, there you go. I bet
he was a New York State trooper. So.
I was right, and I didn't know it.
Yep.
So, and your notes to me, you said you finally got to walk home into New York. That must be kind of special, actually.
It was quite special, except for the fact that apparently there's no sign, which was kind of weird. Every other state has like some kind of marker, like this is New York. The only thing we had going into New York was the leaving Connecticut sign. So I walked like a quarter of a mile.
Why are you surprised?
Before I realized, and I kind of had to turn around and go back. And
but why are you surprised? New York never has felt the need to announce itself. It is New York. So they assume people know.
I suppose that's true.
Their feeling is probably you're lucky to be leaving Connecticut, and here we are in New York, and we don't have to tell you it's New York. That should be fine. And you said there's been a fair amount of road walking with the washouts. How bad have the washouts been then?
I mean, we're walking along, and then the next thing we know, there's a sign on a tree, and it says, this bridge is washed out or whatever it was. There was one it was really kind of, funny, not funny, right? So the original printed sign said the bridge over, and I can't remember the name of the brook right now, is unsafe. And then somebody had taken a sticker and put over the word unsafe, gone. And I looked at that and I was like, I guess we're road walking, So,
oh, dear. Is that extended the miles you're doing then?
I'm not really sure. It's kind of hard to tell with, some of these things not being in far out, whether or not it's less or more or whatever, but it is what it is at that point. So.
Right. And you said that it was quite poignant to see the 9/11 memorial, and I was surprised at that. It was a surprise to me how emotional it felt, even though I wasn't in New York at the time, to see that memorial. So it's so well worth just hanging out there for a little while, isn't it?
Yeah, I knew that it was there, but I didn't know where it was, I guess. And it's like sort of vague and far out, and you just kind of walk up on this open, exposed area, and the next thing you know, there's this painting on the rocks, and it's I turned on my phone to look at it. When you kind of look at it the way it's meant to be looked at, it's pointing directly towards Manhattan.
Yes. Yes.
So it was daytime, obviously, when I was going over, and so it wasn't like I could see the city or anything. But that was definitely a moment. I wasn't in New York at the time. I was in school at Connecticut, but it's definitely a thing in our memories.
Affected everybody, not just Americans. It affected the rest of the world felt that as well. Funny enough, we were watching The Crown yesterday, Princess Diana's death, and I hadn't realised how, because my girlfriend told me that, how affected America was by Princess Diana's death. So when something cataclysmic happens, both, the whole world feels that pain in many ways as well. And you said also you saw the telephone of the wind. That means something to a lot of people, I know. Did you have a conversation?
I didn't, only because I knew that my dad was waiting to pick me up on the other end.
Oh, dear.
I have conversations. I feel like I don't need a telephone. I appreciate that is there for the people that do feel that need. And it's a very interesting and, again, poignant reminder. And I knew it was in that park somewhere. A friend of mine had told me about it. And I had been to that area before, but I wasn't sure where it was. And it kind of snuck right up on me at the beginning of the day and caught me a little off guard. But I have conversations with those people that I've lost all the time. And it definitely brought a few tears for sure, but I didn't stop to have the conversation.
And this is a bit of trail trivia, which I didn't know there was such a thing. You've seen 2 little libraries on the trail since you've been in New York. Yeah. Are they trying to up the reading age in New York or something?
I'm not really sure, but as a former librarian myself, I always love seeing, and usually you see those things in neighborhoods. Like, for anybody who's not familiar, it's like a little box somebody makes. And actually, my very good friend, Gina, she's been in the process of making one and getting it registered and stuff, because she's a real bibliophile. And, we walk up to this one shelter, and under the underhang of the shelter is, from the Dover Public Library, is a little public library thing. And it was full of books, and it was very well maintained, and it was not close to the road either.
Good Lord.
Surprised.
How do you check out books then? and even more important, how do you return them?
Well, it's a sort of like take one, leave one sort of thing with these. You just pick one up and take it with you. But I thought, like, what a cool thing, especially. I know there's definitely been a few times I've been stuck in a shelter for a day that would have been a lovely thing to have. So.
And so, how long has your dad actually been slacking you then? So how far has he had to drive? How far has he had to drive?
So I think I should have figured that out. Like, the passage of time is still
weird. It's weird, isn't it? Yeah, I know.
Can't even get your brain around. But we only slept out one night in Connecticut.
Wow.
And we haven't slept out in New York at all yet. And I think I'm about halfway through New York at this point.
Good
so
Lord.
It's been well over a week, I would say. The drive in one direction has been anywhere between an hour and an hour and a half.
Wow, bless him. He's going to have to stop there soon, though, isn't he? I suspect at some stage. Certainly well before Harper's Ferry.
Yeah. The funny thing is, I think as we get closer to New Jersey, in some ways it's closer, just because the trail goes right along the border of New Jersey and New York.
Right.
Compared to where my parents live. So, and I did kind of say something about, like, this is a lot of money in gas and tolls and things. And, my mom was like, he's been wanting to help you for months. Let him help you.
That's wonderful. Do you know what? That is wonderful. And I'm sure it feels like a warm embrace for you and for Mike, I suspect, as well. So I think that's lovely. And of course, you're now probably smelling like a day hiker, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because you're sharing all the time.
I feel like I'm getting really spoiled. I have mentioned to more than one person in the last 8 months that the miracle of hot water out of a wall is not something to be underestimated.
Absolutely.
You definitely appreciate that a lot more as time goes on. And yeah, the ability to not only do that, but also I've been making miles, but it's been a break on my body too, like some of the aches and pains that are just a normal part of doing this are a little bit less because I haven't had to carry my full kit. And
that's great.
I've been kind of laughing about, like, my body seems to have lost the ability to gently lower myself down rather than just kind of plop down as I'm coming downhill. And that definitely, starts to affect the joints. My knees were kind of feeling it yesterday. So, just not having to carry all that weight all the time has definitely been a big help.
So you said you're hoping to finish by mid-December, which is, now 3 or 4 weeks away.
Yeah.
Is that looking likely or not?
I haven't totally done the math. I'm under 400 miles at this point to go.
Right. Okay. You got to push it a bit. There's no question about it. I'm wondering whether Mike's going to be able to push it. If he's had this for 3 days, you're just going to have to see how he does. Of course, you could of course accommodate your father. He could come with you. You could put him up in a motel, and then he can slack you all the rest of the way, couldn't he?
I was trying to get him to think about doing that even when we were in Connecticut, just so it would save him a little bit of driving back and forth. And I think he's getting a little uncomfortable with driving at night, so I've been trying to keep it to daylight hours as best I can. But I don't know. We'll see what he's up for.
And what about deli blazing? You've run across all the delis in New York yet?
The only one I've run across so far, yesterday I left off at the Appalachian Trail Market in Garrison. So and that was an easy spot for my dad to find to pick me up. So I definitely ran in there and got a few snacks before I headed home.
So you're not hiking today because you're at the urgent care with Mike. By the way, has he been seen yet, or are you just hanging? Is he still hanging out waiting to be seen?
The last text I got was he's waiting for the nurse.
Oh, gosh. Okay. And you say you're going to cross the Hudson on your next hiking day. I'm trying to think because, of course, you're going north to south. Okay, fine. And then you go to the zoo and then up Bear Mountain. Is that open? Because I know that lost a lot. It's not open still. I didn't know that. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. There's a detour around it. So.
Well, I've got to tell you, you'll appreciate that. It's a lot of bloody steps uphill and then even more downhill. So I'm sure you. Yeah, so you know what? There's worse things to do. Okay, well, look, I'm pleased you're going well. Sad about Mike, obviously, and just keep pushing, and we'll catch up again next week. Okay.
All right, sounds good.
Great. See you then. Bye.
Bye.
As they say, it never rains, but it pours. Poor Mike. When we finished recording, Mike actually came out of urgent care, and Jessica let me know that he has strep throat, which I'm assured is pretty uncomfortable. I've never had it myself. I hope that Jessica knocks out as many miles as she can while he's recovering. If she focuses on some quite big mileage days, she'll really appreciate the work she's put in as she closes in on her goal before Christmas. It's going to be tight, no question, but she can see the finish line, and I hope she grits her teeth and gets it done. Now, our Black Friday news. Do you guys remember that we put together a 13-hour series of videos from our Woods Hole weekend last year? Well, after a conversation with Austin and Jester, we've decided to allow them to go wide from this week for free. At 7 a.m. Friday morning, they're going to be live on our website without the need of a password, as well as at my YouTube site at Hiking Radio Network. I've really only used this site in the past to post the odd video from my 2014 and 2019 hikes, as well as each of my podcasts. You'll also be able to find them at Jester Wallace Productions' YouTube channel. Adding these videos will encourage me to think about doing a bit more on video. Anyway, for now, you'll be able to find our Woods Hole weekend series from Friday morning at 7 a.m. Eastern. They cover every aspect of what it's actually like to hike the Appalachian Trail, from gear to food to fire starting, all those things you would want to know if you were going to be hiking on the AT, whether a section hike or a thru hike. Really good information, and I hope you check them out. Finally today, we hear the closing stages of George Stefanos' 1983 thru-hike as he finds kindness in Monson, before entering the 100-mile wilderness, still searching for that first really enticing sight of Katahdin, now less than 100 trail miles ahead of him. I'll see you next week. Chapter 24, The Promised Land. Monson, Maine to Able Bridge, Maine. The Wilderness. Monday, the 26th of September 1983, mile 2030.5. My last lodgings on the Appalachian Trail turned into one of my fonder memories. Not only did the shores take me in on nothing more than my word that payment will be forthcoming in the morning, but they treated me like one of the family. They seemed to take a genuine parental interest in the yearly progression of quirky dreamers who endure months of various hardships for one bright moment in the sun. The food was great, and Mrs. Shaw just laid it all out on the table for guests to help themselves to as much as they wanted. For dinner, I had fried chicken, baked potato, corn and peas, bread and butter, several glasses of milk, and a huge slab of banana cream pie. Burp. Has everybody noticed with what loving care I described each meal on this trip, which was not backpacking food? Then you will not be surprised when I describe this morning's breakfast. Orange juice, milk, eggs, bacon, toast and donuts. All you can eat. Help yourself. I cannot figure out how they can afford to feed thru-hikers like this at such low prices. I finished eating and waddled over to the post office. The package containing the work boots I purchased in Cloverdale, Virginia had arrived in time. My money order was also there. I cashed it, grabbed my packages and brought it all back to the shores. As I was sorting the items and loading my backpack, Mr. Shaw came into my room. For some reason, he felt the need to apologise to me for forgetting to offer to loan me spending money last night. He explained to me that thru-hikers often arrive in Monson with no money to their names until the post office opens in the morning. He always lets them borrow a few bucks if they wish to go out and hit a few bars on their last night in a trail town on the AT. I assured him that I just wanted to rest. I was just happy to be trusted for the bed and the meals. He was a nice guy with refreshing checkout policy. Leave whenever you're ready. I finished loading my backpack and put on my boots. They had been a late emergency addition to my mail supply drop after I called from Rangeley to tell my family that my hiking boots had blown out. It was a relief to finally have some protection for my ankles once again after 154 miles of running shoes on slick, rocky Maine trails. I went downstairs. Mr. Shaw sells Coleman fuel at cost to hikers who stay at his place in whatever odd amount they require. I bought a pint to top off my reserve fuel bottle. That should easily get me to Katahdin. I paid my bill, which totaled $15.65 for the bed, a shower, the fuel, and my 2 meals. It was the best commercial deal I had encountered on the Appalachian Trail, and one of the more pleasant surprises. I said goodbye and returned to the post office to mail the packages back home with the items I didn't need. I stopped at the general store to pick up batteries for the flashlight, candles, a final journal notebook, and a container of salt. I hit the road north out of town at 11:45, a very early start considering how much I had to do this morning. It is unusual for me to be so businesslike when leaving a trail town, but lately the magnetic pull of Katahdin has become irresistible. The closer I get, the stronger the inner restlessness stirring within me becomes. Sometimes at night it summons me from sleep. I return from the dark lands, the urge to be travelling ever northeastward so compelling that I lay awake for hours. This morning, for the first time on the Appalachian Trail, I didn't need to drag myself reluctantly away from the pleasures and conveniences of a trail town. They would have needed to tie me down in order to keep me in Monson any longer. Monson was a pleasant little New England village of neat, weathered old houses with big screened porches and nice people. It was the type of place where the general store had a big sign advertising a brand of live bait displayed prominently on the front door and a small collection of movies on video in the back. A network of dirt, gravel and paved roads radiated out from the town centre to dozens of lakes and ponds of various sizes. Fishing was serious business in those parts. It was a cloudy, hazy day with a threat of rain. That figured, as I intended to tent tonight. The AT followed the main road north out of town for a half mile, and then another paved road for another mile or so. After that came 2.5 miles along a gradually deteriorating gravel road, ending at the point where a 1982 trail relocation by the MATC began. The Appalachian Trail left the road and entered the woods, soon re-emerging at the shore of another beautiful mountain pond. Next, it followed a very rugged course with numerous ups and downs along some slate ridges. It was an interesting route, despite a lack of views, but the constant, short, steep stretches were hard on my body, particularly since I was carrying a pack loaded with 10 days' worth of supplies after a long day yesterday. I passed 2 more attractive ponds as I traversed those ridges for 5.5 miles, but toward the end I was growing weary of all the climbs and descents. I was relieved when the Appalachian Trail came out at Little Wilson Falls, which were rather spectacular. A large brook roared over precipitous slate ledges into a deep canyon. The ledges were vertical, 12 to 14 feet drops connected by extremely narrow steps, which kind of describes much of the Appalachian Trail in Maine. I killed a lot of time taking pictures and simply enjoying the falls. The descent to Little Wilson Stream was another challenging trail brought to you by your northern New England kamikaze dealers. The water was a bit high at the ford. My feet got a little wet, no big deal. The highest water was ankle deep over the submerged rocks. I didn't even bother to remove my boots or socks. About 5 minutes past the ford, the new 1983 Maine guidebook directed me to cross an old tote road which used to be part of the Appalachian Trail. Well, the AT turned right onto that road, so apparently the MATC included another relocation they have not yet gotten around to finishing in the guidebook. That means I'm on my own until Barron's Slide. There's no description of the old trail in this guidebook. The point at which the AT turned onto the road was 10.5 miles from Monson, so that is the distance with which I'm crediting myself today, although I walked a mile or so further. The mileage will all sort itself out tomorrow when I reach the end of this section. Tonight I'm at Little Wilson Campsite, on the bank of Little Wilson Stream, about a mile downstream from the falls. The site is on a gravel road accessible by car, so, as is usually the case, it is slightly trashed out. On the plus side, it has garbage cans, which will enable me to leave here tomorrow without my first day's garbage. I will not get many chances to dump my trash in the days ahead. Tomorrow, the Appalachian Trail follows roads all the way to Long Pond Stream Lean-To, where the 100-mile wilderness begins. When I take those first steps up Barron Mountain, I will finally be in the cool wilds of northern Maine, the promised land of fir and spruce and icy streams, born out of the dreams and dust of a long, hot summer. There were more times than I care to remember when I thought the day would never come. I can now barely remember a guy who used to quit everything when trying became a little too tough. Reliving that time is almost like thinking about someone I used to know. I look southward on the trail tonight, and many miles away I see a guy struggling towards a goal he has no hope of ever attaining, but who keeps going on for the simple reason that when a man makes his last stand, he owes it to himself to make it a good one, even if it so clearly is a lost cause. And for once in my life, finally, I kind of like that guy. Perhaps that was all he ever really wanted. It's been a long, long road. Tonight, I feel the burden of those miles, so I think I'll try to rest. Perhaps I'll be able to sleep through the depressing sound of the first raindrops pattering against the fly of my tent. Tuesday, the 27th September, 1983, mile 2049.6, 88.9 miles to go. It is hard to believe. The number of remaining miles has diminished from more than 2,000 to less than 100. Soon I will be a thru-hiker. Last night at the campsite, I met a thru-hiker from Lime Rock, Connecticut. After backpacking from Springer Mountain in Georgia to Kent, Connecticut, he flip-flopped from there to Katahdin and began hiking south to Kent to complete his Appalachian Trail thru-hike. He was running very late in the season and needed to perform this manoeuvre in order to beat the snows, which usually begin near the middle of October, closing Katahdin for the winter to non-technical climbers. Upon hearing my name, he broke out with the dreamy smile I have lately come to know so well and told me he has been a big fan of my register entries since Georgia. I guess they did do some hikers some good. Last night was unseasonably warm and muggy. I could not seem to get moving when morning came. I did not roll out the sleeping bag until after 6:30, and I didn't make it out on the trail until almost 8. The rain never arrived, and last night's clouds were beginning to break up, although the air remained humid. It appeared that another stretch of warm, hazy weather was on tap. The Appalachian Trail was a road walk for the entire distance to the next shelter. I have no idea how many miles it was, as this section was not in my guidebook, but it took me almost 2.5 hours to complete. Along the way, I crossed the tracks of the Canadian Pacific Railroad. As I recall, that is the official southern boundary of the North Maine Woods, an enormous wilderness tract owned by several giant paper companies. There are few roads, towns or villages. I also passed a rustic community consisting of a bunch of rude shacks surrounding a rundown mobile home. I've been warned about this place in Monson. Many backpackers have run into trouble here lately, but they did not mess with the backpacker with no name. I passed 3 or 4 huge trucks loaded with timber coming from the opposite direction. The road deteriorated into a rutted logging track. I met 4 thru-hikers who had flip-flopped in Pennsylvania, 2 girls, a cat and a dog. The cat would ride all day atop one of the backpacks while the dog ran alongside. Probably a pithy comment on the relative intelligence levels of these animals, but I still love dogs. A short time later, I met a married couple who had flip-flopped in Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. When I told them who I was, they both smiled, and the man grabbed my hand and started pumping it. He said that he'd been reading my entries and cracking up ever since Springer. You know, were I not such a humble man, all this stuff could start going to my head. His wife told me that all he has been talking about since they flip-flopped was how he was going to get a chance to meet me. The women in our lives tend to overstate such things to our occasional embarrassment, but I think I've met my biggest fan. He was especially partial to one Virginia entry, which I can barely remember, about making it to a shelter at the end of a long, hard day, dropping 3 hits of acid and freaking out. I think I began babbling something about how in control of the experience I felt, except for those enormous mice with long, sharp fangs who were eyeing me ominously. It was okay, but drug humour is always easy to create. I know this will sound corny, but meeting all these wonderful people lately and learning how much laughter and pleasant forgetfulness from the travails of the trail I provide for them, with absolutely no financial reward to myself, kind of makes me feel like I want to puke. It was much easier walking after this, what with my big, fat, swelled head buoying me up, relieving some of the weight of my heavy backpack. I reached the end of the road walk at Long Pond Lean-To at 10:30 and spent 45 minutes zoning out. Today was just another of those days when I could never get going. I was constantly taking long breaks for no apparent reason. I enjoyed myself, but I most definitely was not the lean, mean mileage machine. The 50-odd pounds of supplies crammed into my backpack may have had something to do with that, or the culprit may simply have been Maine disease. That is what northbound thru-hikers have taken to calling the condition which afflicts us in this state, with a reluctance to speed the end which is now so near. We slow down to savour all the sights, stop for the night early, and our daily mileage drops. It is time to stop and smell the roses. It was a weird day, what with a severe dose of Maine disease and that magnetic pull of Katahdin battling it for control of my mind and my body. Apparently, they reached a sort of compromise because I moved very slowly and stopped frequently all day, but I kept pushing onward until after nightfall and put in 19 miles. Maine disease notwithstanding, the barren Chairbat Range was a hike which demanded extra time. The Appalachian Trail travelled a rugged course with constant sharp ups and downs through high, windswept forests. Dusky fir and spruce rose above black, spongy ground cluttered with masses of dark grey boulders. Moss and ferns in vivid greens brightened the perspectives. The traverse began with a long, arduous haul up Barren Mountain from the Long Pond Stream Valley. The trail's first breakout from the woods was about halfway up the mountain at the top of Barren Slide, where fractured slate cliffs trailed a jumble of boulders far down the mountainside, leaving a path of destruction which had obliterated a huge chunk of forest. I took another long break there. Lake Onawa's long, irregular shoreline dominated the remote, forested valley below, with Boarstone Mountain's sway-backed ridge culminating in the striking, massive double hump of its summits, rising above the far shore. Bordering the lake's inlet stream was the Bodfish Intervale, a flat, broad swathe of bottomlands amidst a broken country of ridges and ravines. It was a grey, overcast, humid day, but clear enough for the eye to enjoy some views. There was not much for my camera to pick up, however. Up at the top, an old fire tower featured sweeping 360-degree vistas limited by visibility conditions today. The blurred vastness of Maine's famed Seebeck Lake was barely discernible several miles to the south. A line of mountains to the north beyond the narrow S-curve of Long Pond were mere ghosts in the haze. The trail continued eastward along a humpy and hummocky ridge. Masses of slender downed fir limbs and plenty of dead trees lie amongst the moss and rocks, a tough neighbourhood for trees. Cloud Pond lay on a small plateau tucked below the narrow ridge crest just past Barren's summit. A quarter-mile side trail led to a tiny, dirt-floored shelter perched upon its shore. The first glimpse of the pond was a shallow pocket cove at the eastern tip. Tall strands of water grasses rose above the surface of the pond. Sunlight on the rippling waves was reflecting moving lines on the grasses, a gentle strobe effect which was rather hypnotic. Lily pads bobbed in the shallows while rocks and driftwood lined the shoreline. The dark spruce and fir surrounding the lake were gnarled and shaggy, their trunks covered with a greyish, scaly fungus. A hummingbird hovered briefly in the sunlight beside me, and a weasel skulking through the shadows stood on its hind legs to check me out. A string of lovely little bogs between Barron and Forth Mountains, vividly green amongst the darker, more sombre spruce and fir forests, struck me as some kind of alien landscape. Old log walkways, weathered a pale grey, traversed carpets of peat and quiet brown pools. Marsh grasses, ferns and at least a dozen species of moss grew among gnarled dwarf spruce. Shaggy, stringy mosses hung from dead trees like long grey beards. The last bog was the largest, channels of brown water twisting through stunted spruce and full-sized cedar, tall ferns turning autumn browns and golds, and innocuous-looking carnivorous flowers. The silence was broken only by the drone of a few flies and occasional bird calls. Hints of mist above the pools loomed eerily through the deepening twilight. Forth Mountain was a mother climb, and the summit ridge a series of rugged knobs, but there were some nice views to the north and east. Third Mountain was scenic, but a 5-star pain in the butt for a backpacker. Its entire ragged length was a series of abrupt knobs separated by strip bogs nestled in dry ravines, pocket rock garden meadows and open rock ledges with views back west toward Forth and Barron Mountains. When I finally staggered up its main summit beside an impressive line of cliffs, I saw some great views of the entire range from Barron Fire Tower to Columbus Mountain and East Chairback Pond with Whitecap Mountain beyond. But traversing that mountain chewed up all kinds of time, the one commodity I could least spare. Daylight was fading fast as I descended into the gap between Third and Columbus Mountains. Nevertheless, I could not resist following a venerable grassing logging road off the Appalachian Trail for a quarter mile to check out West Chairback Pond, snuggled between the two mountains' broad shoulders. Much larger than Cloud Pond had been, most of this heart-shaped body of water was hidden from the trail by a large peninsula with a wooded island just off its tip. It was another lonely, lovely spot, but it probably would have been more sensible to skip the long detour. Yeah, like they'd ever stopped me before. The overcast finally cleared as I climbed the day's final mountain. From the top of Columbus, I had haunting visions of the deepening colours of the post-sunset above the trees to the west and a good view of twilight settling over the ponds and mountains north and east. I needed my flashlight along the short drop into Chairback Gap, which made for slow, hazardous going on the rough footway. When I finally reached the shelter, 3 campers were already there, equalling the total number of persons with whom I've shared shelters in the entire state of Maine up to this point. There was still plenty of room, but it seemed almost cramped in comparison. My shelter companions were a guy from Belgium and a Boston couple with a dog who were hiking south through the wilderness to Monson. The Boston couple was exceptionally nice. The man had a warped sense of humour, like mine, and we giggled all night. His wife told me about a couple of must-see spots on the trail ahead. They offered me a hit off their joint, but having learned down south how the munchies can decimate the food supply, I declined. I've come too far and faced too many more miles of wilderness to screw up now. Speaking of screwing up, I finally dragged into this lean-to at 7:30, well after nightfall. I enjoyed my day, but main trails are too rough for that kind of risk, especially with me being this close to Katahdin. It's time to get serious. For almost 2 months now, I've known that I was not going to quit, but I can still be defeated. I've made my last night hike on the Appalachian Trail. In the early stages of the rowboat this morning, I passed the 1920th point of the Appalachian Trail. Just past Long Pond Stream lean-to, along the climb-up Barron Slide, the number of remaining trail miles dipped below 100. Nevertheless, I've yet to see Katahdin. That bites. Every time I climbed a mountain purported to provide a view of that long-sought dream, either the visibility was limited or I was just unable to pick it out from the other tiny specks on the horizon, never having seen it before. Now that I've seen wild moose up close, this is my one big disappointment in Maine. There's supposed to be an excellent view from Chairback, the first mountain I'll be climbing tomorrow. This evening's late clearing has given me hope for good conditions in the morning. I'm close enough now that Katahdin should be unmistakable. The saga draws toward a conclusion.